So hello everyone again. Welcome to our final session of this excellent workshop, in my humble opinion.
So far.
Go ahead, Javier.
Yep. Okay, we have our last chapter of our meetings, and the last 4 chapters. So I hope you read them, because there's always more in those chapters than what I can cover. And there's very nice observations and poetic language that Krishnamurti uses, which I'm not using, mostly using a little bit more logical, streamlined sort of things. And I think that poetic language does add something. I like Kay's poetry. He stopped writing poetry after some years. He used to write poetry when he was young. It was a bit old-fashioned language. I think he was too influenced by the King James version of the Bible. But later on, he didn't feel like he could write poetry. And yet his writing is very poetic when he writes about nature and his descriptions. And even the way when he writes himself, his own teachings, when he's not giving talks, is very poetic. And he tells stories, like he told one story in one of these chapters about the 2 monks helping this girl cross the river. There's something very beautiful about that. So do read the book itself. We're going to try and see through the main points that he raises. In these chapters, as far as I could tell, basically he treats the subject of thought again, goes back to thought, perhaps in a little more detail, then talks about silence, space, silence and solitude, experience and meditation, and ends up basically with revolution and the religious mind. Now, naturally, Krishnamurti had that objective, right? It's a thematic again, is that teachings structure themselves along those lines. That he started, if you remember, right off, saying that humanity has always wanted to reach something, find something beyond thought, something beyond just the self-made systems of beliefs and so on. But for that, thought has to be understood, because thought can also invent the beyond. In fact, it has invented it. It has created an illusion within itself that there's a part of it called me, called the self, called the soul, called the Atman, whatever you want to call it, that is beyond itself. So its longing for that which is beyond has led to its projecting it and creating the illusion of that beyond. But whatever it projects remains within its own field, and therefore there is not a beyond. So for me, I have no hesitation myself in calling Krishnamurti a mystic. Some people have taken me to task for using that word, because apparently in English the word mystic can have the meaning of a fantasist, somebody who sort of invents things and believes them like that. That's not what even our own Christian tradition in the West meant by that, but rather the person, human being, who has access to that other dimension. Call it the sacred, call it whatever you want. He calls it truth, he calls it reality. Sometimes later he calls it something else, the other, the otherness. The other is just to indicate that it's not something that we can recognize, something that we can appropriate within the field of the known. And that's why his inquiry, because you cannot know that thing. The only thing we can do, according to him, is to understand the field of the known, free it from its illusions, so that we can see. That inquiry in itself takes him through the whole field of consciousness, which he understands to be the field of knowledge, of the known, therefore thought, because thought is the response of memory, and all the structures of self-deception that he creates from within, and free it from it through insight, of course. He cannot free anybody or anything through insight. Only insight liberates. Insight means the direct perception of what is inside, right? If one has an insight into something, it means one perceives the truth and the falsehood of it. As far as I'm concerned, basically insight is the operation of intelligence in the field of reality or in just anywhere, right? But mostly in the field of reality. That's how Bohm might have put it. And I thought that in the few experiences of insight I've had, if experience is the word, because he's going to question it, that's how it works, right? There's a moment of perception which you don't know where it's coming from, sees through something that was bothering you, and the problem is gone. So freedom is possible, but what is required for that freedom? Freedom is essential for Krishnamurti, right? He started out with that, right? When he's made his famous speech of the truth is a pathless land, dissolving the order of the star. That was a kind of Krishnamurti's basic manifesto. And he stated his purpose, that he wanted to make human beings, he called it man, but anyway, that's the term he used at the time, human beings, unconditionally, absolutely and unconditionally free. So freedom was his purpose, is the purpose of all these great teachers. They are the liberators. They at least intend to liberate, right? He couldn't do it, right? That's the strange mystery of truth, that nobody can do it for us. But of course, their insightful inquiry can help to open our eyes to what is involved, to what is the scope of the inquiry itself, what is the nature of the trap. So that's the prison in which we're caught. And if we're attentive, he trusts that a lot, then we might just be lucky and see. I'm not sure if luck is the word, but there you are. So he starts always with thought, right? And thought being the response of memory, he finds that that is already the fundamental limitation, where being bound to the past, he cannot see anything new. And for him, truth is essentially new, constantly new. And that's why it cannot be known. So it's a peculiar truth, right? That's why I say there's a mystical truth. It is the truth that religion has always sought, that all religious people has always been looking at. Is not a scientific truth. Even scientists, though, need insight to find new truths in the scientific field. Einstein had to have an insight. Newton had an insight. But they had an insight within their own particular field, right? There was a problem they couldn't solve with the known. You see, happens just everywhere in our lives, that we try to answer first any challenge that we meet with the known, and that is inadequate. Sometimes it's adequate enough, right? I need to put this chair over there or whatever. You know, there are some issues in which the known, and that's why we have technology, that's why we have science, that's why we rely on all these things, right? When I was sick some years ago, I went to the doctor, they did all the tests, they did all the analysis, and they said, this is what we suggest would be a good answer. You agree? I said, well, let's get a second opinion. So you get a second opinion, you always get a second opinion. So get a second opinion. The second opinion said, well, we don't agree with that. We think that that's too much of that. And then they started communicating with each other. My specialist in my hospital with specialists in another hospital who were more specialists than he was. So they started a discussion, and eventually they came up with something that seemed so logical, natural, and sane and healthy that I said, all right, I think this is very good. Thank you very much for being so considerate. And so I underwent a certain operation and everything came all right. So knowledge and the increase of knowledge, because this knowledge didn't come just overnight. It was developed over many, many years. Trial and error, wrong hypothesis, malpractice. For today's standards, there will be malpractice, but for hundreds of years. We had to play with it. You see, we had to go along and find out what is it. It didn't come overnight. Knowledge is cumulative by nature. But Krishnamurti says truth is not cumulative. Truth is a totality that exists in the moment. And that's why he suggests the mind has to be at that same level, because the question of communication, that to communicate, you must be at the same level at the same time with the same intensity. It's not only just between us when we use language, like we were talking about yesterday, but it is with reality itself. That for truth to communicate with us, for us to be in touch with truth, we had to be truthful. We had to be at the same level of creative intensity, of timeless emptiness and energy. He talks about energy also, very interesting in this presentation. Not my presentation, his book. So he talked about energy. You see that energy suddenly comes in. Why? Well, we're going to see it's very simple. You see, because truth is also a heightened state of energy. It may be energy itself. Right? I recall when he died, you see, he was about to die, he called for a tape recorder. He wanted to make his last statement. So he made his last recorded statement. And in there, he said something very peculiar, as far as I was concerned, which was that he said, nobody knows the energy that went through this body. A 12-cylinder engine. He used to like cars, and I think at the time, 12-cylinder engines were just the top. But he talked about the body as the vehicle for the energy of intelligence. And it was enormous, tremendous energy. That's why he had pain, because the brain couldn't quite take the intensity of the energy that was coming through. This was his sense that in the cosmic energy can also come through us if we do not bind it to the matter of thought. See, there's an interesting discussion there, which is, he says, thought is matter. Not that matter is against energy, matter is energy. But it's energy that is caught in a pattern. It's a very interesting definition. Even Bohm was so, of course, if anybody knew something about matter, it was David Bohm. And matter, of course, as you know, nowadays in our modern science, is not such a rigid thing. I think when I hear the word matter, in my mind, I have a picture of a granite boulder. They don't. I don't know what picture they have. They might not even have any picture. They will probably just have a formula on a blackboard, you see, a wave function, which is strictly probabilistic. I have a boulder from my childhood. This is matter. You know, you kick it and it kicks back, meaning action and reaction. This is how we know matter. So he says, thought is matter. And that's why all thinkers are materialists. I found that very interesting. See, because we were talking also with Miles, right? About, he raised this issue of idealism and materialism. At least that's how I interpret it, by the way. We didn't finish that conversation. But there was the sense of, in our philosophy, the materialists and the idealists. And Kay says, no, as long as you're thinking, these are all thinkers, the idealists and the materialists, you're all materialists. The spirit goes beyond the field of thought. That's just the point. And thought can create whatever realities it wants, but that also is what makes it unreliable, right? It can fantasize, it can imagine, it can picture, and therefore have the experiences which it itself has projected out of its own internal demands. Okay, therefore takes issue with experience. It says experience is not the measure of truth, therefore, which is how we take it, right, generally. But he says, what is experience? Which is the ground of thought. Look at it. It's the basis of thought, is memory, experience. When he says, what is thought? The response of memory, knowledge, and experience. Well, those sort of are the same thing. You can make distinctions within it, but essentially the same thing is what ends up in memory as information of fact, supposedly, with a lot of illusion, by the way. So what is experience? And it's very interesting, why would he discard experience, you see? Whereas we are all relying on it, and not just relying on it as the foundation of action, because it gives us the information about facts, establishes the reality, what is actual, what is not actual, right? But also we want experience because somehow internally we depend on it to feel that we are achieving, and that we're coming to something. So experience is kind of our way through the world in terms of knowledge and in terms of becoming. The word I keep using because he uses it a lot. I want, therefore, to have the experience of truth, the experience of God, whatever we want to call it. And he says that experience is just a projection of a desire. And if you actually see God, it will be the one that you have, from your background, you have yourself projected. And you recognize them as such. And therefore, it is in the known and within the known that experience exists. So he said, but therefore, you can't see anything new. You cannot really experience anything new, because to experience anything, you must recognize it. And therefore, is already falling back into the old pattern. He told us once this anecdote about himself, because he was very psychic. And he said, I used to see the Buddha. And we said, oh, fantastic. We were all very enthusiastic. I would like to see the Buddha too. So, Christ or whoever you want to see. So, but Buddha just said, he could see the Buddha. So he said, one day the Buddha appeared in my room. So I said, I'm going to test whether it's real or not. So I walked right through him, and he never appeared again. I said, what? I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't let him be there. It's just so fantastic. The company of the Buddha. No. Kay was so drastic. He was not standing for all these spiritual appearances. He tested whether it was real or not, walked through it, and the Buddha disappeared. So he was questioning all the time this ability of the mind to trick itself into having seemingly transcendental experiences, which he feels are just projections from his own background. Now, mind you, he saw all kinds of things which for him were real, and he never talked about that. But that's because he felt that those visions or whatever were not relevant, strictly relevant. That what is relevant is the self-knowledge, the freedom from the factors of self-deception and conflict, because that's where we waste our energy. And therefore, the gathering of all that energy for the insight into the whole meaning of consciousness, so that it comes to order. That's what he called religion. It's very interesting how he defined religion. He looked at the word religion, and as you know, people are discussing still what is the actual etymology of it, but they trace it to Latin, essentially, religare. And re just means to do again, or back. And ligare is to bind. A ligature, that you even have it in English as well, is like a ligature. So you tie something back together. So the idea normally is that we've been split from ourselves, from our origins, from the goodness of the universe, or whatever, the sacred, and therefore religion is the attempt to bring those together. Apparently the word yoga has a similar meaning because it comes from yoke, what you put on the cattle to pull the cart. So it's yoking it together, bringing us together in sync with what is wholly transcendental. So that's the meaning of religion. But he says, no, religion is the gathering of all energy. So what are you really gathering? What are you binding back together is energy. That we need energy in order to perceive. We need energy for everything anyway, right? We need energy for walking, getting up in the morning and talking and everything is energy, right? He says we need that energy, psychological energy, in order, or whatever I'm not sure is psychological, is energy, in order for that insight, total insight into the nature of the psyche itself. Now they go together, right? Because we won't gather that energy unless we understand consciousness and how it fragments itself, enters into conflict, creates its own self-delusions, creates its own internal friction, wastes energy. That's why we don't have passion, he says. We're not passionate, because the passion is energy, the intensity that gathers, say, behind a question, because we're afraid, for example, of passion itself, because it overwhelms us, and we are afraid to be overwhelmed. It's also true, isn't it? We're afraid to sort of just let go. It's all a matter of control. We're under control. Everybody's controlling, keeping it all within measure. Measurement becomes our sense of order and our sense of well-being. But measure is actually, in the field of consciousness, becomes its own limitation. It is thought. keeping its own parameters, keeping us within his own parameters. That is his own denial of passion. Well, I'm not sure, but I think there's something to that, no? He says, do we ever ask a question with real passion? A fundamental question, because the answer you get will depend on the intensity of passion. And the solution to any problem depends on the quality of energy you bring to bear on it, which is the intensity of attention. They're all the same. The quality of attention, the intensity of energy, right? Which is what solves these problems. That's the energy of insight. You see, insight is like a laser beam, which is very concentrated energy. I don't know anything about lasers, but it's a concentrated energy. It's like a flash, and can see through. This is the nature of insight, right? It's a flash, and that needs energy. But that means understanding thought, understanding its limitations, how it creates that binds us to time, and therefore creates this self-defeating movement within its own limited domain. I mean by that it's sort of bound by itself, is self-referential, and then creates the illusion of something beyond, but it remains within itself. Besides, it's caught in the opposites. It's caught in contradiction. That's what he says, right? Thought seeks happiness, seeks pleasure, and does not realize that is inviting pain. We want peace, but meanwhile, we take pleasure in violence. Right? We want security, but we divide ourselves from others so that we make sure that there is conflict and war and all kinds of things, right? So that kind of contradictory thought seems to be moving, and then he says, I must be good, right? But in the very desire to be good, it has evil already defined, so that our life seems to be within the field of thought, confined to what Krishnamurti called the corridor of the opposites. Now, the corridor of the opposites, I know it very well from my own background as a Catholic, as a Christian, probably anywhere, you're brought up to walk through this narrow corridor of the opposites, the virtues on one side and the vices on the other. Sins, right? Some more deadly than others. So there you are, caught between those two, morally, ethically, in the corridor of the opposites. But that's conflict and therefore wastage of energy, whereas religion is the gathering of energy. So once again, he sees a contradiction in the very religious movement that we have created for ourselves, and that is the end of freedom. So what is he appealing to then, right? So he said, we are not alone. So he goes this is very mystical path. Those of you who may be aware of some of that, see, like in Spain, we had to read St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila, because they were literary figures. They wrote beautiful poems. When you went to high school, you studied Spanish literature, and you ended up reading their poems. But of course, they could write love poems. You could take it normally like a love poem, but it wasn't a love poem. It was a love poem, but the love was something else. It was communicating a mystical encounter, right? That's also how Krishnamurti was initially in his youth, very much along the lines of these guys, because they took a very strange book in the Bible that doesn't seem to belong there, which is a Song of Songs, is a love poem. What's it doing? A very sensuous love poem. Well, Krishnamurti knew it by heart. Now, he had the typical mystical interpretation that this is the love that has to be loved. He used to talk about the lover and the beloved. The beloved is what is beyond, right? Is the sacred. So that's what you are in love with, really. So that's how they translated that poem mystically in that way. And that's how St. John of the Cross wrote about it as a very beautiful poem called The Dark Night of the Soul, in which that's what it's actually about. You have to go through your own dark night. But of course, you can only find your way if love is burning in your heart. And then there is the mystical union, right? With the sacred. So there was Krishnamurti. He says, for that, you must be alone. And we are seldom alone. But what he means by alone is empty of everything you are psychologically. What he calls meditation, that's where meditation comes in. See what the Christians call contemplation. I'm just going to draw a parallel. That is, that Christians would say, you know, good old St. John of the Cross, he said, all right, the mystical way, there are three, the via mystica, the mystical way has three ways. One is the via purgativa. You must, is the purgation, the way of purgation, which means freedom from those factors of division and conflict at the end of the day. They call it sin, they call it anything, but they talk about the same similar things. Your arrogance, your lust, your pride, your aggression, your greed, your violence, right? Your deception, your lies. Can you understand that and be free from it? Because they did it with the corridor of opposites, but that doesn't work, right? So something else has to come in. Via purgativa, and then via contemplativa, which is the state of contemplation. Kay didn't like the word contemplation for some reason. He preferred the word meditation. He had always, therefore, a difficulty with that word, because the word meditation has an etymological meaning, which means measure. Etymologically means measure. And for Krishnamurti, meditation is not measure, right? Not measure at all, because it has to do with pondering, with thinking. You see, the Christians also use meditation. Meditate on your sins. So they went and picked up Christ and they started talking about Christ. And they started meditating that way, right? But that's not what Krishnamurti means by meditation. It's something else. Meditation is begins with choiceless awareness of what is, so that already you begin with non-duality, because the duality is created by the judgment, right? By the choice one makes, the condemnation, rejection, identification. He says, don't start there. That's already the beginning of, you go in the wrong way. The first step is the last step, he always said, right? Therefore, what's the first step? No choice. Can you do that? Can you be aware of whatever it is? You see, meditation is the state of awareness of thought and feeling as they happen without judgment. So it is choiceless awareness that's happening here. It's not concentration, it's not repeating of mantras, it's not absorption in a picture or an object. What is not? I mean, there's not a method, not a system. He discarded all that somehow, even though he told a little bit that there are certain things you can do, in fact, that are conducive to that state of awareness. No, if you read, I was surprised, and some Krishnamurti people have a difficulty considering that Krishnamurti might have had a system of meditation. But he taught it to us kids at Brookwood Park. Now, I may have not been very diligent, not practicing it. See, because he said there's no practice. So I think there was a little contradiction somewhere in there that needs to be resolved still. Because he said, sit quietly with your back straight so that the blood can circulate to your brain. Wait a minute. Who cares? Right? If there is no method, no technique, what should the blood do? Because your brain has to be properly oxygenated. And fix your eyeballs. What? This is technique, right? In a way. Why would you fix your eyeballs? Because there was a because. Because the eyeballs are very directly connected with thought. If the eyeball moves, then that moves thought, and vice versa. If you fix the eyeballs, then you have already not you diminish the excitement, the incitement to thought. See, he was doing all sorts of things, knew all kinds of things, and he told us to experiment with it. Fix your, and then pay attention to your body. Because your body is very important that the body be completely relaxed. Now, every meditation people, they say this, the Buddhists particularly, they all are keen on this. So quiet. And if you feel some itching, don't try to control it. Don't control, just pay attention. So it was not control. He dismissed control, concentration. repetition of words. It's just attention to what is. But at the same time, he said there are things you can do if you want to experiment with this. There's just some indications as to proper experimentation for yourself. And then he said you pay attention to thought, to your consciousness. Now, that's a mess. One thing after another, my shoes, sex, food, clothes and shelter, and whatever else, mathematics and physics. Whatever is there is a jumble. Everybody's consciousness is just chaotic. It's true, it's very true. You don't even know what you're thinking. And when you discover what you're thinking, you say, why am I thinking that? Or who's thinking anyway? It just goes on by itself. It's by layers, layers of disorder. So he said, all right, just pay attention. Again, no choice, no good or bad, just the movement of thought, as I was describing the other day, also in another meeting with us, between us, of that sense of just let the movement be without judgment, understand it. He sometimes used to say, become aware of your thoughts and ask yourself also why, right? Why is that happening? What's the origin? Because in this set of chapters, he asked a very interesting question, which I had not heard him asking oftentimes, which is we're trying to find out what is the origin of thought. Why would that be important? And for him, it seems in the description that to find out the origin of thought is part of discovering the way of non-contradiction psychologically. Why would that be? See, is it that we are in contradiction because we are not aware how thought arises, why it arises, what's its origin, and therefore we're not aware also of its movement. See, when he discusses understanding anything, be it fears, thought, anything, he talks about understanding its nature, meaning its origin, its structure, how it is put together, and its movement, how it goes on or proceeds. So this is his way of understanding any psychological movement, its nature, structure, and movement. I said, why is he stuck? So then he's doing the same to thought. I think most of us have never really thought about that. What is the nature, structure, and movement of thought? So the first one is the nature, the origin. Where does it come from? Now, he seemed to have answered it by saying it comes from memory. But then you have to ask what is memory? And what's the origin of memory also? Because memory is for him also the result. It's like it builds upon itself. The moment there is memory, a recording is recording. And what memory is necessary? See, he points the question right at the beginning. We're going to find out what is logical, sane thought, and what is thought that has no meaning. And for him, psychological thought has no meaning. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. This is the poor old Shakespearean tragedy. So there you have it, but he's looking at that, right? All the noise, he says, is coming from unnecessary memory. So we have to find out how come this memory has also become so important to us. Why we keep recording what is not necessary to record. And at the moment it is recorded, then it keeps feeding. Thought is just the mechanical response of that memory. So we have to go even beyond thought, if you like, or to the root of thought to understand why that is happening. Right? So that's not so easy. I don't know that I've ever come to the origin and root of thought, that to see how it arises. Why do I recall? Why do we recall our hurts? See, this is very strong memories. And then they shape our lives, and we just cannot get rid of them. And thought, thinking about them, cannot get rid of them, cannot solve these psychological problems, because the root of them is in the memory itself. So you have to go to the memory and perceive the memory as memory, and maybe then, as the emotion that it contains blooms, be free from it. Perhaps, I'm just putting that forward, because this raised that question for me, these chapters. It's one of the questions that right in the chapter 13 is raised for me, and I couldn't answer it properly. So I have to leave it there as a question mark to discover, and also in life, to find out what's the real source of it. But Krishnamurti says, well, that we have to do, otherwise there's no real silence, right? And silence is what concerns him. To find a space, not the space between the observer and the observed, which he wants to dissolve, because that's the space of distance and friction, and therefore a wastage of energy, of fragmentation, but the space in which nothing exists, in which there is the absence of thought, not forced, but through understanding. It had a very beautiful memory. To come upon it, to have this emptiness of the mind, the cleanness of the inner world, the purity, the innocence. He talks about innocence. Interesting, no? I thought that word is very precious to him because it means that which is not hurt, that which cannot be hurt, the innocent. But that which is not hurt is therefore that which is not divided or in conflict. Therefore, is freedom from the self-centered movement of consciousness. Right? That is innocence. And he says only the innocent can see what is true. The innocent is also the state of emptiness, and he calls it also solitude, aloneness, silence. He uses different words, right, for it. And of course, that's the movement of meditation, because he defined it, the emptying of consciousness of all its content, and that becomes key to the awakening of the religious mind, because our religious mind is the same as meditation, except that now it has the characteristic of an intense quality of energy. It can see through the whole, whatever remnants of consciousness there may be, because we're already practically beyond it. The question of sequence, I lose it at a certain point in his descriptions. What comes first, what comes second. But there it is, this movement of meditation, he called it a movement, to the perception of what is, the staying with what is without choice, begins to clear the whole turbulence of consciousness, the self-occupation, empties it of its content. That's the key meaning he gave to the word meditation, the emptying of consciousness of its content. That, of course, because the content is no longer in this dualistic structure, which is the nature of it, there is energy, and that energy can break through to some insight into the nature of truth, or can receive truth. We'll see. But very interestingly, he has one passage there, which I found baffling and yet insightful, which was, you could say, if I'm free from my dualities of the observer and the observed, thinker and thought, all those struggles of everyday life, then I'll be free also from content. Because what is content? A lot of the content is just the memory of the unresolved issues that we have in life. That's why consciousness perhaps keeps itself busy all the time. Because one, as I respond to the new with memory, I created a problem. The memory cannot answer the challenge adequately, and therefore it remembers it. It feeds back on itself. It has to remember it because it's unresolved. And what is the mind or the brain busy with? Trying to resolve its problems. The problems it itself has created with its inadequate responses. So memory builds up to an enormous momentum. Look at the momentum that it has. Memory and conflict. They build and build on each other, and that's why these conflicts cannot be resolved. And I suddenly came up with this thought, why are these conflicts not solved? And he was offering, in my view, one way to understand that, perhaps. I offer it only hypothetically from what I was reading, which is the inadequacy of the response of the past to the present challenge, which is new, is what creates our problems. Because it is a problem, we record it as such and build more on the memory in order to respond further on. But because the memory will inevitably be inadequate to the challenge, it will never solve the problem. The only thing he can do is to realize the futility of that whole movement and therefore open up to a new perception, to the real perception of what is there in front of his own eyes. The human problem is a problem of misperception due to the projection from the past. That's why he wants to end time, wants to empty consciousness of its content, which is the known. What is consciousness then? We don't know. and there he goes, you see, emphasizing, therefore, this quality of emptiness, silence, solitude, in the sense he understands it. We are alone, all one, when we are empty of ourselves. When consciousness is totally empty of itself, it has order, it has beauty, love and truth, he says. Well, lovely. But we'll see. Those are just the words that he uses, right? And as he doesn't talk about, he talks a little about religion sometimes somewhere, but he doesn't like to talk about religion because that becomes a noun and it becomes a kind of institution per se, but rather the religious mind. He doesn't want to go anywhere outside the field of the mind in terms of these qualities. So the religious mind is what he's talking about, which is that state of insight, energy, non-duality at all, where freedom and wholeness for humanity exists, and in whose emptiness there can be maybe the encounter with the other, with the beloved. Alrighty, that was my sermon for the day. Sharifa.
Good afternoon. I have been hearing about the recording of the memory in the psyche, and who is the one who's recording, and are we conscious that we are recording? Because what I am conscious is in this psychological field, it's actually very distorted because it only depends on a lot of circumstances of the moment in the psyche. So if I am in a good place, everything is rosy. And if I'm upset about something, the memory of the same situation could be very distorted. So I get that it has zero value to accumulate memory in the psyche. But that kind of insight is not, I don't know what's the word, strong enough for, blasting away all the useless memory kind of, I still hold things in the psyche that is, upon examination, it's actually comical. I can laugh at it and drop it. But it still plays. I observe that. In spite of knowing that it was distorted to begin with 10 days ago or 10 seconds ago. But it still accumulates, it still comes in. And so my question is that true for everyone? Or what do you do? Who is the one who's recording? I don't want to be recording. I know it's absolutely no value, and yet it's there. I can watch it, but sometimes it acts before I can interject. So can you expand a little bit on that?
I'm not sure if I can. I'm in the same boat. It's interesting, this whole issue of recording, and why we record and who records. Because you could also say, and I think Keio even sometimes said, that it is the function of the brain to record. So it's not me even. It's just an organic function, because the brain has a self-defensive inherent mechanism. And what it records a lot of is any danger that it perceives or assumes perceives, as well as what is pleasurable, right? So it has its own focus already of pleasure, pain, fear. Pleasure, pain, and fear are, I don't think I mentioned just like that by Kay. It's just the three active principles of consciousness. And I think it's not just consciousness, but the brain, if we want to distinguish a little bit. He doesn't often distinguish, like in these chapters, he used the word the old brain as not being able to meet the new problem, because he's talking about thought. That is the brain that functions from memory, is an old brain. So we need a new brain. a brain that operates from the new. But the brain is concerned with the known because in it finds security, or it thinks it does, right? It thinks that what, better the devil you know. In the known, you can always rely on it, and you can create your own circle of security. That happens to be a very fragile kind of security. And in fact, the known, as we see, and according to Krishnamurti, is one of the key factors of insecurity in human existence when it functions psychologically in the way we just described, with this vicious circle of perpetuation of problems that it cannot solve, right? It needs an insight, in fact, into that very structure, and therefore the suspension of that structure. And that's what we don't seem to have, and maybe the brain doesn't have, right? Because, yeah, you record, and you say, well, that's just the nature of the brain. But then what happens to that recording, and what does he record? Krishnamurti raises the question, is it possible to be so attentive that one records what is necessary and does not record what is not necessary? Now, what is going to say what is necessary and what is not necessary? On what basis would you make that distinction? Because it has to be made in the act, like you say. It has to be an instantaneous thing. You can't just later say, oh, I'm going now to my recordings and this is, I delete the unnecessary. It's before.
So fast, it happens so quickly that, one has to be so attentive. Otherwise, you're preoccupied with something else. That's why the recording is taking place on its own. If the attention was really laser sharp at the moment, I've seen that those times there is nothing. There's no recording. There is not even me, like there are times like that with that attention. But then their mind is already has the preoccupation going on as well. It's multitasking. It is constantly trying to put things in order or solve a problem or have ideations. So there's a lot going on.
Yes. Welcome to humanity. I'm afraid this is the way it goes, and this is the way we are, and this is the challenge and the beauty of being human, that we're so complicated.
But when you read him, everything is, wow, yeah, it sounds so, relatable.
Yes.
And then in actuality, I'm just stunned by there is this simplicity and innocence about this whole understanding what he's trying to say. And the mind is so preoccupied that.
Well, that is it. You see the word? Look at the word, preoccupied.
Yeah.
Is occupied beforehand.
Beforehand.
Is that before, with something from before?
What chance do we have, like in that way? It makes me cry sometimes, really, honestly. I have tears, because there is this kind of feeling that one wants to be free of that preoccupation. Like I see my grandchild, she's only 1.5 years, and she's already developing things that I don't know where did she get it from. Now you just mentioned the old mind, old brain. Probably she's come with all that stuff already. So what chance do we have when there's so much already gathered here? I think it's in the attention, just
Yes.
Yeah. You have a chance. Yeah.
What chance do we have? This is what chance do we have? We had to get one of these quantum mechanicists to calculate our probabilities. How do they work? Who will be free? See, it looks like there's only one great free human being every 2,000 years, according to Christian calculations, if they were to admit K as one of those. So that's the probability every 2,000 years.
I have also one more question, if I'm not taking away too much time. If anyone wants to come in, please do. But I have a question for you, if it's okay with you. The seriousness that the young people had when they were in front of Kay, when he was giving them, there was a talk going on. Like I've seen the videos of Rishi Valley and Brockwood and all these young people, young students are sitting and so engaged. They're like really engaged, asking questions and really there, in touch with what was going on. I cannot imagine that happening right now today with any young people like that. Because everyone has become so complacent, what's the point kind of thing,
Yeah.
So you were one of the lucky people who were able to sit in front of him, because when I listen to the Rishi Valley talks with the young kids, it just brings tears to my eyes. Really, it's so beautiful. They're so engaged. They're so like right there. I mean, was that your experience too when you were?
We were a bit older than the kids he talks to in Rishi Valley, the ones who sit with him on the podium. Yeah, because Brockwood is already a high school.
Right. Yeah.
With 4 adolescents, so we were a bit more troublesome.
Oh.
And rebellious and all that. But I think we always, all of us, we were not many, there were about 70 of us. I think my experience was that we were all extremely attentive and certainly extremely respectful. And we demanded, in fact, to have meetings just with him. And we said we don't want these recorded. I regret that. I was one of the leaders of those rebellious people who said no recording. We had recordings up to here, and you said recording is not the question. So listen, be coherent and take the microphone away. So he agreed to take the microphone away. You see, we were just rebellious. I regret it because I would like to have listened to those meetings. Very nice, because they were very beautiful. And Krishnamurti became a bit different himself also with us. He was different in that he was not the master on the podium whipping the slaves of time. He was a loving father and spoke like that. He was just a good old, he said, "You're my children." We were all saying, "Oh, fantastico." But of course, children become what they have to become. And that was the intensity and the quality. Let's put it this way. I think what you're talking about, or what you're referring, and what I'm getting, and correct me if I misunderstand you, is the concern with just these things.
Yeah.
And it being part of the culture or part of our education, or the possibility of, even as a parent, sitting with your kids, or as a teacher sitting with your kids, or the students or whoever, and going into these things in a similar manner. Of course, we are not Krishnamurti, so we have to do it in the sense of just inquiring together into these fundamental human issues. And I feel that there, culturally, we miss something. Personally, I feel the same. Even with my kids, which I didn't bring in any of this, didn't try to, because then people react. When your father is Krishnamurti, 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 they throw Krishnamurti and their father out the window. Correctly. So I didn't do that, because I said, I know this is how it happens. They feel they're being brainwashed by something. But I don't know if I told you this already, because I don't know whom I tell. But when my kids reading them one evening a book, and I read Krishnamurti, and a very difficult passage from one of his dialogues with students, in which Krishnamurti was asking lots of questions, and they were answering them intelligently, and they were 7 and 9 years old. They were answering Krishnamurti's questions intelligently. They never heard those questions. So in a way, we're failing to appeal to a more universal quality of mind. This was coming to me. Because the kids hear a question from Krishnamurti, one fundamental question, and they answer it. And they answer it beautifully. You say, how do they know this? They don't know, but it's in the question. See, the asking of questions, the inquiry, is part of the awakening of intelligence and of the mind coming to understand itself. And by denying these fundamental questions, by going the practical way and technological way, which is of course significant and necessary, I'm not dismissing it, but we kind of culturally lobotomize ourselves. I feel that there's a collective lobotomy, a collective denial of the more universal aspects. because religion fell apart, and whatever fell apart, we discarded, and ideologies fell apart. Everything fell apart. It's like we no longer have to ask any questions because there are no answers to these questions. We want only questions to which we can give an answer, and a practical one that serves our basic intentions of security, progress, pleasure, and satisfaction. But there are questions which are fundamental even to understand that very system of consciousness which is creating this rotten society. And there's no question that the society is rotten because we are rotten. Sorry, but so if the fruit is rotten, do something about it. But that's also because we are rotten in great part because we don't take it seriously. We don't take the totality of our responsibility in terms of relationships, society, and being as a culture. We've done something very odd. The moment we started questioning these things, we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Not that religion didn't need to be thrown out. Krishnamurti also throws it out as institutional, and yet he keeps religion.
Mm.
For me, Krishnamurti is one of those who's saving the baby as the bathwater is being thrown out. Right?
The baby can flower then.
Well, there is an essence here of humanity. It's not just K.
Yeah.
K happened to be the flower of that in our time. Is fundamental. This is how I see it. Anyway, forgive me. When I get on my podium, I also become a preacher, and I have to stop. So, but the feeling I have, anyway, I share it as such, is that there is a fundamental human issue that we cannot, if you come in contact with it, and if you look at your life a little bit, and it's all a matter of sensitivity, of course, yes, all of this. So if you're not sensitive to it, you will wash over and say, what is that all about? I didn't see the tree. Well, it was right there in front of you, but you were blind and you didn't see the tree. Somebody else saw the tree, and not only the tree, but heard the sound that was coming from the roots. Question of sensitivity. This is not just K. K is the flower of that seed or intent of humanity to wholeness, to goodness. Call it what you like. The words there fail. But we are in our culture, in our time, I also feel this. And that's why it's all going haywire. That for me is one part reason why it's all going haywire, because it's not a concern with the whole. The me has taken over, and the me is structuring itself through thinking, through knowledge, into its own, pursuing its own materialistic aims. Within the field of thought is all matter. So we are a materialist society, though we have other social concerns, but fundamentally we're stuck in a materialistic field of consciousness as thought and desire and self. Time. We're time-bound, and therefore, according to Krishnamurti's diagnosis, and I think I'm beginning to understand how correct he is, this is limited, and therefore we condemn ourselves to living in darkness, fear, time, darkness. Sorry, those are kind of, again, preachy terms, but the sense of, therefore, what should we do? See?
So basically, we are all hurt. So that's why we will never be sensitive, or we will never be able to see things, because we are all hurt. I mean, show me one person who's not hurt. Even this 1.5-year-old granddaughter, she behaves sometimes like she's hurt for no reason. She doesn't have a clue what is hurt, because we treat her like, but she's hurt. So there is this hurt, then there is no sensitivity or collective connectedness, because we build walls and we are all isolated as human beings. So it's a big thing to think about, how do we shatter all of that, and that's the human condition at this point, I can talk to only few people like this, in my real circle, because the moment I say anything like, what about the human condition, they don't start philosophy, they just brush it aside like I'm talking philosophy, because no one is passionately concerned about these matters. I can't say no one. There are few people.
No, There are enough people.
Yeah,
But,
there are enough people, but
and even those of us who are concerned know the limitations of what we're doing.
limitations, yeah.
So, but at the same time, there's no denying the significance of raising the awareness to a higher level in terms of our culture, right? And Krishnamurti actually I remember him saying this thing, which intrigued me very much, which was that only the religious mind can be the ground of a new civilization, of a new culture. And God knows we need a new culture. He didn't say that. I said, he didn't say God. And, we need a new culture, period. And we need, therefore, a new mind and a new heart, right? But that's we cannot have a new mind or a new heart without understanding the old and its place, if it has any. That's the thing. The old is hurt. Is not
But
trained.
everyone bypasses that. Like if you see in today's time, understanding the old, people are bypassing it because the new age thing about the,
we played this game with ourselves.
Atman and whatever. We bypass that. We don't examine all of that and create this new structure that I'm the God, or I am that, and I'm Atman. So is that ever going to make it, the stupidity and the degeneration of humankind right now? Can you see through that? Because that's another, a trick.
Well,
that's taking place.
We're escaping. Krishnamurti says we're escaping. We're running away. From what are we running away? Just from ourselves. But what is that? Right? So, in a way, we have never come home.
The wrong turn, never return.
We have not, as human beings, we are all as an odd species. That somehow the animal is in his territory and is in his rooted in the earth, and we are somewhere else. We create these imaginary existences for ourselves and are pursuing those images and not in contact with even what we are. And but what we are, you can see what we are from Krishnamurti's perspective is not exclusively, even though it has part within the domain of thought and time and experience, which is where we based our own identity and being and contact and relationships. There is more to us. There's a being that is not us. That the fullness of our being signifies going past any kind of identity and confinement within the material content of thought. That itself is a denial of our whole being, is a denial of our wholeness, and therefore is the root of hurt. Thought is the denial of innocence. See what I'm saying? See, there's a lot in that. He's saying the innocence is not here because we're full of experience. And experience is fragmentary, and therefore is responsible for conflict and all the grief and sorrow that is in the world. This is a tremendous diagnosis. I mean, he puts it in that absolute term. I mean, I'm just repeating him because I'm not sure if I myself personally could put it so absolutely. So I am being I should be a bit hesitant. But there it is, the sense of the very movement of thought and consciousness fragments and is intrinsically the root, because it is experience, is the denial of innocence. Miles, you look like you're a captain in a ship. What are you doing?
Well, I'm at a rec center. I'm going to head out for a workout soon. And,
you're a very active guy.
I need to, have you spoken on this topic before, and has it been recorded, Javier?
What topic?
Well, the book, The Freedom of...
No, I haven't talked about the topic. No.
Because I would just like to suggest, I had so many downloads in these last 4 days, and in particular today. If there was someone, I'd put up my hand to do the work. Even if this talk could be edited however you want, but preserved somehow and made available, and this is just my perspective on how it was landing with me these last 4 days, but the way you were weaving all these topics together really, really hit with me. And I'm just guessing that it may with others, but I'm just so grateful for the way you have delivered these topics, and I'm just blown away. I hardly know where to start, but I just maybe make a comment about time, because you mentioned
But by the way,
time. Yeah, sorry.
in relation to the videos, you talk to Ralph.
Yes,
He's
yes,
the
I
one
know.
who's
Well, I
managing
just
this.
want to add that we do plan to put this up on the whole workshop up on the presentation part, not the question and answer part, or a comment and answer part, but the presentation part. We plan to put that up on our YouTube channel. There's a Krishnamurti Center of Canada YouTube channel. Just Google Krishnamurti and Canada on YouTube, and you'll get there. And we've recorded a number of our previous workshops there, and we will certainly want to add this one. It's a very important one to add, so that way it'll be available to you in the future too.
So I
Thank
also had a
you.
question. Sorry. Was there mention of Javier, your notes being made available to us? Because I was
yeah.
really looking forward
Well,
to
I
being
was
able to
going
read
to-
them and go over them.
I was going to add that too at the end, that we will be making available Javier's notes also.
Yes, just think that those notes are just my own summary notes from reading through the book, okay? So
Sure.
not my own comments even. I don't have even my own questions in there, which is I always leave for later. But then, of course, they invariably come up. So it's just my attempt, as I said earlier, I had said in an earlier meeting of ours, to sort of streamline what he's saying so that I can make it mine in terms of a proper, sensible perception or account of what is happening with us. So that's my attempt. But you didn't get them earlier because I just finished the notes on the chapter on today's thing just a few minutes before we started this meeting. So you will get them afterwards. You'll get them after the meeting. So I will send them to Ralph, and he will send them all to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a couple of comments, maybe. You know, the words movement and, you know, truth is a movement. I was wondering about how dynamic you would feel truth is. You make notes. People have gone before. You know, lots of stuff from Ramana Maharshi, of course, in the presupposing of a non-existent thing. The mind presupposes a body of which it is a part. You know, all of these traps, of course, in time. Time is necessary for these things. And so here's a word of maybe encouragement, just from my perspective. And that is, particularly in the physics community, there is a pretty concerted effort going on that is dismantling this notion of time. Space-time is fundamental, and a reconfiguring of this. And to the sort of uninitiated mind to this subject, this may be something that you know, we're thinking about. Well, how do we turn this around? How do we sort of waken up the sleepy minds out there that are, you know, they're stuck in this time construct, and they aren't questioning it. But well, physics is questioning it. I just want to say that this is all being questioned, and something fresh might come out of this. You know, in the decades to come, maybe sooner.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
without hope. Let's hope without hope. Yeah, this question. Krishnamurti would say the scientists are busy with all these interesting things, but they are not applying it to themselves. So let's hope that they do apply it to themselves. That they see that this is actually not just about matter in the universe, but is about consciousness. So that would be interesting to see whether they can have the subtlety. Look how subtle we're pointing out. You know, Sharifa was pointing out very clearly the subtlety involved, of perception, how sensitive one has to be to even catch one's own thoughts. So I don't know what the scientists are going to do, but this is for us to be scientists of consciousness, not in the lab, but in our own daily lives. It's a very beautiful invitation I find from Kay, no? Can you be aware of what is? That's the essence of science.
Well, this may also be a countryman of yours, but Christopher Koch, K-O-C-H, I believe, was very much in the materialist camp, even up to about 2 years ago. He just wrote another book. He's out there speaking of it. But these are people that are, in the scientific community that are researching, doing things, that are having direct experience with what we're talking about now. So another one is Federico Fagin. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I heard of him, yes, just in passing, but I have heard of him, yes.
Okay, well, he goes way back, kind of the father of the microchip, but highly respected theoretical physicist. And he's talking about this in the same way we'd be talking about it in our meeting today. So if people are interested, you can go to the Essentia Foundation, and of which Bernardo Kastrup, who I mentioned a couple of days earlier, philosopher, is the director.
Bernardo Kastrup.
Yeah, Christopher Koch and Bernardo may be countrymen of yours, but I find it encouraging to listen to scientists who are approaching this intellectually and also directly. Do I dare use the word experientially? But yes, it's happening in some circles. I'm encouraged.
Good. Now let's proceed. This is a collective task as well as individual task.
There's also the Pari Institute that is following up on David Bohm's approach and understanding. So they have a website and they hold conferences, and these are available online and videos, etc. So it's named after a small town in Italy, in Tuscany. PRI Institute. Probably Javier, you know it, right?
Yeah. Aware of it. And it was set up by David Peat, who was a colleague of Bohm and his biographer. So he's heavily influenced by Bohm, by the whole Bohmian approach. So they do other things. And he's now the director of programs is, like Miles keeps saying, one of my countrymen. My countrymen are appearing everywhere. What's happening, Miles?
Well, you guys, I love the people from the Netherlands because they seem to speak very directly to things. I noticed that with you as well, and I'm all in with that. So I think I should move. I think I should move to the Netherlands.
Well, I'm an immigrant here. And I found it difficult when I first arrived to deal with the directness of the Dutch, because I was coming from being educated at Brockwood Park, a very English school, You have to be polite per se, treat everybody with respect, and beat as much as you can around the bush. So I was a bit taken aback. These guys were just. Hey, I said, what are you looking like? I said, hey, Kate, we deserve, to create a space of harmony first. They don't have time because the dikes are leaking. So they have to act immediately. See, there's the culture, this is the environment, there's the whole tradition, and they're Calvinists. They don't beat around the bush. They go for their goals and they achieve them. So there's a nation of achievers. Now, good, all right. So I had to adapt. So I learned a little bit to be direct, but not so direct. I think there are degrees.
Speaking of that, just one more comment, and because you've had direct contact with Kay, I was watching him and Bohm in a conversation, in a dialogue, and I'm going to go back and try and find it, but it really struck me when I saw it, when Bohm directly asked Kay about this, his experience with undivided truth. This is my term. I don't think he said that, but if you know what I mean, with undivided reality, my perception of Kay was that he almost froze. He was very hesitant to describe anything or to really get into it. I don't think he did. I think he just, the one thing he said is like, well, I don't want to say anything because it would seem childish or something like that. I thought, wow, he's approaching this from all different angles, but he just seemed unwilling to answer the question directly, about, well, what is this undivided truth in your experience of it? How have you experienced this? Do you have any comments about that? Or
you see, Kay's basic approach is a negative approach. It's a good old mystical via negativa. He says you can't approach truth positively because that's a projection of your own desire. And what you will find is your own projection. But truth is not anything you can imagine. It's not anything you can invent. Whatever you invent will not be truth. So drop it. What you can do is to work upon yourself, to learn about yourself in such a way that you are free from precisely the factors that prevent direct perception. This is his approach. So he says, when you see what is and stay with what is, and you develop that discipline, what he calls learning, right? That's the learning, the staying with what is without deviation, distortion, delusion, then truth is available to you. And that nobody can describe for you because it's always new. And what you describe is not the truth. But he wrote his notebook. Now, the notebook is an extraordinary, as far as I'm going to make propaganda for it. So be warned. For me, it's really one of the great spiritual works of our time. And when they ask, why did you write it? Because it's a journal. Started in 1961, finished somewhere in 1962. And he started saying, things like he was there. Things like this. The infinite was there, the other was there. There was a tremendous energy, the blessedness, the this, the that. And the people say, what's he talking about? He's not talking about thought, freedom, and the misery of man. He's talking about some presence, some visitation, whatever you want to call it, right, of what he called the other. The other is his experience. No, you see, the words come in again. Forget experience, his encounter. No, not even his. You see, the whole thing breaks down. You see, the language breaks down. That's the problem. Since I start using words in the usual way we understand them, and because we're meeting his own meaning and what he's pointing to, those words fail. Those words break down. It's not his experience. It's not an experience. It's not his. What is it? You see? Yet he wrote it down. And he had this thing with Bohm that he was with Bohm. He actually, the two of them, launched on an enterprise of putting words as far as they could to what could not be put into words. You see, that's maybe Bohm's contribution, or how he pushed Kay to be more deliberately descriptive of whatever he was undergoing. But I recommend the notebook because there Kay just tells, again, there are words again, and he says those words are not, he keeps denying the word, because then we can always also get caught in the word and the associations of the word. And of course, that's not it. It's just his description. And he knows that the living thing cannot be contained in that, only a pale reflection, if that can be conveyed, and yet conveys an extraordinary sense of wholeness, sensitivity, and transcendence of what is holy. See, now our time, the word holy is gone. It's gone from our vocabulary. It's just not used. Maybe we use holistic as the closest we get. But the sense of sacredness in life, of that total sense of truth, wholeness, and beauty coming through for any one of us, is like it has disappeared from the map. Well, maybe because we don't have it either, no? So maybe we're just being realistic. But comes a fellow like this, who has this daily visit, I call it visitations. He had even one joke at one time. I laughed, I cracked up laughing. He said, I went for a walk. I got back to the house and the other was there, waiting. I felt like apologizing, being late. It's like he has this friendship with this quality of infinite energy or whatever it is, otherness, to the point of saying, I'm sorry, I went for a walk while you were waiting here. You're waiting for him. And he used to say this thing, no, look, if you are in the state of order, integrity from within, you don't have to chase after it. It will chase after you. And how is going to describe this infinite thing? Cannot. You can only approximate it, and he does his best. I think he did his best with the dialogues with Bohm, because Bohm pushed them into that metaphysical realm, right? The ending of time. When I first read The Ending of Time, just to give more sort of a kind of say the spectrum of the manifestation of this issue in his work. When I first read The Ending of Time, I was really surprised because Kay was no longer talking, at least in the beginning, about this realm here where we try to learn about what is the self and freedom from the self. But he was saying, oh, that anybody can do. It's nothing. I said, nothing? We're still in the dark here about all this. But he says, he was trying to describe with Bohm the journey that begins where the self ends. It's not the ending of time, it's what is the journey beyond the edge of time. Time has an edge, has an ending, but the journey does not end there at all. It is just a beginning, and that has infinite depth. And he describes, so to some extent there, what's involved in that, though it is the problem with it, not the problem. See, the mind wants to fix something. The mind works by fixation. And this is the least fixed of all. All it can say is that at that point, the beginning is the end. So it's a total collapse of time because it's the very source of creation itself. And there, the word is, no, in the beginning was not the word. The word came much later, and it couldn't capture the beginning, although that's a translation from the Bible that says logos. So it's another thing that you can get into a discussion. But the sense of, you could say some people translated, you see, that was Paul's problem. In the beginning was the meaning. In the beginning was the truth. And the truth was silent. You see, even some mystics went that far, right? But out of that silent voice of energy came form. And form became matter, or matter took form. And then we got thinking and we got all that. So the question for in Kay's teachings, as far as I'm concerned, is the retracing of these steps of manifestation, which end up in duality, to the source. For me, Krishnamurti's teachings represent the good old religious journey to the source. And he does.
That's part of the paradox that we're dealing with, though, because when we talk about journeys and everything, we're evoking some concept in the mind of time, and but we're also talking about no distance here. So when we talk about no distance, I mean, what are we really saying? Then you are that, and all these other pointings, you know, from ancient traditions. So it's a very it's something that can't be approached, and that's what I appreciate about Kay was his questioning that gets to a negation of what you are not. To to just notice and without concluding, you know. This Jungian thing, Jung wrote a thing called the Red Book, and it wasn't released until years after his death. These were visions that he had sort of early in his career, waking visions and kind of torturous visions for about 3 years.
Wow.
And so the mystical side of Carl Jung was really revealed in about 2010. There was a Library of Congress recordings on YouTube that I listened to, where Jungian scholars were sort of dissecting the Red Book and its meanings. And one of the scholars quoted a poem by Winston Auden, I think his name was, and he said that we are being lived by powers we pretend to understand. And I thought that was a very nice, succinct way to sum this up, you know. And in that sense, I do see it, and I don't know, I'm not going to claim a knowing of it, but maybe there's the possibility that truth is dynamic, that there's I think Bohm might agree with this too, that there's some dynamic kind of inflow from what's being manifest and a kind of a learning that goes on.
He was very close to that, I think, in his own understanding, what he called the undivided flowing movement of the totality. So he had his own terminology. I don't think I'm even quoting him correctly, but he had something like that. That's why he was keen on process philosophy and a language that was not subject and object, that sort of the bringing the dynamic back, the dynamic as a fluid, that the movement is prior to the thing, that the thing is the product of a movement. And when we fix upon the thing, we have already deviated from the movement. That's why we tend to the static. And part of our problem is exactly that. The difficulty, the tension between the static and the dynamic, between the living and the dead. Consciousness tends to the static because it fixes the past. And to that extent, that is energy caught in a pattern, which is how Kay defines matter. Is that the stagnation of movement, to bring movement back into it, already liberates that energy that is trapped in the pattern. See, it's almost physics, this. I don't know, physicists will probably disagree, but I don't know, but it's almost physics, right? Energy caught in a pattern, limited energy. In fact, the atoms were seen at sometimes by people as just a vibration of energy, the string theory. Is a confined standing wave. It's a standing wave, right? So that's what makes the object, but it's a wave. You break the top and it's gone, the object. So there is that sense of the dynamic and the static. We need the static because that's what makes for structure. And Bohm defines structure as the constant or enduring aspect of movement. It's still movement. There's nothing standing still, but it sort of has a constant, right? It has a constancy within the movement. We can rely on it, relatively speaking. The mountains are falling, and yet look how long they last. And in fact, we know very well that they are actually the product of tremendous forces that came and put them up there for, eons ago, hundreds of thousands of, I don't know, millions of years ago. I don't know. I forget my geology. So there you are. All this is movement. We look at it within a certain frame, and then we say, this lasts, this doesn't last, this is permanent, right? Even good old Einstein talked poetically sometimes about when you look at the outline of the mountains against the sky, you think that it is eternal. Nothing in the world as manifestation is eternal, in the sense that will last forever, And in fact, the physicists, if anybody, know that this world is mortal altogether. They've calculated the end of it. They're weird. So if you want to know when the apocalypse really happens, you can just check with them. They've actually have mathematically defined when the light goes out and when all matter collapses into such a dense ball that not even light will come out of it. See, so there you are. What am I saying with all this, that tribe? movement and static. This is part of what you're bringing in, and I think is part of one of the central core issues that Kate raises. Can we be dynamic? And that's why he talks about, do we look at our lives as dead entities looking at the living, or as the living looking at the living? That's one of the questions he posed. And that means, are you as dynamic as life is? Because if you're not, you won't be able to catch up with it, and you'll miss it. So the wholeness of life, the creativity of existence, requires that we be as dynamic as life itself is. Huh? I think there's something very beautiful in that. But Sharifa, you were saying how that's so easily said, and then try to catch up even with your own thoughts, which are even more slower than life. So it's something. Is a challenge, but that's it. If we're really passionate, like he said about it, we put our energy into it and see what happens.
So with this, perhaps we could think of coming to an end of our workshop, unless there's some last comments from anyone.
Is there going to be a follow-up or ongoing inquiry into the freedom from the known, or another session like this? Please keep us posted.
Well, actually, I'm thinking it would be wonderful if Javier would be willing to actually have a series next year, online series with us at some point. Would that be possible, Javier?
I have to look, because next year is going to be a year of movement, you see.
Anyway, we can look into
we'll take a little, because I'm going back to Spain from the Netherlands. It's a major movement for me after 25 years living here. So see the dynamics.
We can travel.
No, but we'll look into it. We'll check with Ralph with the calendar, and there will probably be some opening there. But we'll have to check this.
But it is very fortunate for us that Javier has actually agreed to be at the center next year for a whole month. As a support person for anyone who wants to come and for what we call our
study days. And what time of the year?
In September.
September. All right. Good.
We'll have different support persons throughout the year, starting in April, coming and supporting anyone who wants to come for study stays. But in September, it'll be Javier.
Is it, Ralph, is it September or October? Is it September or October?
Oh, sorry. October.
It's October. I don't even know myself.
October. Correct.
Even better. It's beautiful down there in October.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
How could I've
never been. I'm very curious.
And also we'll pass out these notes that Javier prepared, and we'll make these recordings available on YouTube, the presentation part. Now, at the center, we may have recordings of the whole workshop, including the comments, if everybody would be okay with that. If nobody would mind being part of being, that this whole workshop becomes available for anyone on a study stay, for example, at the center. If there's somebody who's not comfortable with being seen as participant in the workshop, please send me an email in the next few days, and I'll then have to keep that in mind. But if I don't get any emails, we'll try to make it available also for anyone at the center, because it is it's an extraordinary workshop in my mind. And thank you, Javier.
No, thank you all.
For
I
bringing
have to thank so many people.
teaching to life in your wonderful, unique way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph, for these recordings. Really appreciate that.
Like this has been just a big wow for me. So,
All right, let's keep that energy up. All right, all the best, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye, Ralph. Bye.
Well.